This is Quick Clip 3.03 Chemical Formulas, and in this lesson we talk about how different elements make up the different types of compounds. First, let me remind you of the two types of bonds. First of all, covalent bonds, which are bonds where electrons are shared to fill each outer shell. Here in the example we have two hydrogens and one oxygen, all three of them looking to complete their outer shell. They do this by sharing their electrons. Now each hydrogen has 2 in its first outer shell, and the oxygen now has 8 in its outer shell, making a molecule of H2O. And notice that the H with the 2 in the subscript, meaning that there are 2 atoms of hydrogen, and the single O means that there's 1 atom of oxygen. Next we have an ionic bond where atoms lose and gain electrons. On the left we have a lithium that will lose an electron, and a fluorine will gain the electron. So now the lithium has a full outer shell, and the fluorine also has a full outer shell. This creates a lithium positive ion and a fluorine negative ion. These two opposite ions are going to attract, creating an ionic bond where one is positive and one is negative. So before we go further, let's take a look at the periodic table and look how it's divided up into metals and nonmetals. On the left we see all of the metals of the periodic table color-coded in purple. On the right are the nonmetals color-coded in green. Notice that we have hydrogen over on the left that is also a nonmetal. So all of the nonmetals are on the right except for that hydrogen element. This is important because when we look at ionic bonds, we find out that ionic bonds are created through a combination of a metal and a nonmetal. So when this occurs, it creates what we call an ionic compound. Here are some examples of that, where we have a metal bonding with a nonmetal, magnesium and oxygen, and if you look you can find it on the periodic table. Magnesium is on the left side, oxygen is on the right side. Potassium and chlorine, and also calcium and fluorine. And so ionic bonds are a combination of a metal bonding with a nonmetal. The metal is going to give away an electron, and the nonmetal is going to accept the electron. For covalent bonds, however, it's a combination of 2 nonmetals, so a nonmetal plus another nonmetal. Examples of this, well, and what we call these compounds are covalent compounds, or also molecular compounds. And again, these are atoms that are neutral, they are not ions. Examples of this would be H2O, CO2 or carbon dioxide, and sulfur dichloride. And looking at these formulas, H2O, of course, would mean that there's 2 hydrogens with an oxygen. Carbon dioxide would be 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. The last thing that we need to remember is that whatever we have on the left side with the reactants, we must also have on the right side with the products. So here we have hydrogen and oxygen combining to make 2 molecules of H2O, and then on the bottom we have hydrogen and oxygen making a molecule of H2O2 or peroxide. Now if we look at the molecules and look at the individual atoms, you'll see on the left where we have the reactants. At the top, for instance, we start with 4 hydrogens and 2 oxygens on the left, and on the product side we also have 4 hydrogens and 2 oxygens. For the bottom we see 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens, and then it goes through the reaction, and then there's that arrow showing the products, and we end up with 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens. So it's important to remember that what we start with the reactants, we also must finish with the products. Nothing is gained and nothing is lost.